Everybody, John Brown here again, and I'm going to be doing something a little bit different today. Normally I show you how to play a game and tell you what I think about it, but I'm going to be talking about Netrunner today. I just recently bought into it, decided it's something I like, so obviously you know that part about it, but I wonder if there's other players out there who have been considering it. Maybe they've been hearing Quinn from Shut Up and Sit Down telling them to buy it over and over again, and are still wondering about it. There's plenty of great videos about how to play the game, so instead of getting into that very much, I'm just going to talk about the game to give new players an idea of what they might be getting into if they want to, and try to be as objective as I can about it. I am excited about it. It is something that I decided I wanted to play, but at the same time, one thing I do pride myself on this channel is trying to be as objective as possible, taking in any biases I might already have. So, let's talk about the game a little bit, its pros and the cons, so that anyone else out there who might still be deciding whether or not this is something they want to get into can make an informed decision. Okay, we're not going to get into the details of how to play the game, because there's a ton of videos out there already, and it would take up most of the video time. So instead we're just going to give a very quick high-level overview for people who might not have much of an idea at all about it. So in Netrunner, it's an asymmetrical game where you're either playing as a corporation in a kind of dystopian future where corporations are more powerful than governments, and or playing as a runner who is basically making, attacks on that corporation. So here we have a corporation side set up. So they have different things called servers. Their headquarters, R&D, which is basically their draw deck, archives, which is basically their discard pile, and then other remote servers. And in these remote servers, they might have things that are agendas, which is how you score points and win the game, or other assets, or they might even have traps. The cards that are face up, obviously the other player can see. The interesting thing is the corporation plays their cards face down, and then at certain points has to decide if they want to res them or flip them over and pay their cost. And they might give them special abilities. All of these other cards here, this row here, and then those two cards up there, are ice, or things protecting the server that the runner is trying to get through and potentially score agendas or potentially run into traps. And then, this is kind of neat here, the money tokens, if you flip them over, are advancement markers. So one of the things the corporation can do with one of their actions is advance things. Usually they're going to be advancing agendas, but they might be advancing traps that hurt you, or actually ice that can get more powerful. The runner is a little bit different. Just like the corporation, they are represented by a card with a special ability and an identity, but instead of a corporation, they are actually a person. And then there are different tokens to mark different things. They also have a draw stack and a discard pile, but they're called different things for the runner. And instead of having agendas that they're trying to protect and ice and things, they have 3 rows of cards. They have programs that oftentimes are going to be things to help you get through ice, but it can be other things. Hardware that can help you do lots of things, including install more programs, and also resources that potentially give you all different kinds of abilities. So they're basically going to have these 3 different rows of different things, and all of their cards are going to be played face up, and you have to pay the cost initially when you play them. Just the game is pretty simple. On each turn, each player is going to have 3 actions if you are the corporation, or 4 if you are the runner. And with those actions, you can either draw a card, get a credit, in general play a card for either side, or special abilities that each faction has. And then the runner is going to try to use their hardware to get past ice and potentially steal agendas. The corporation is going to try to advance those agendas to get enough points, but each side can win in a different way if the runner gets forces the corporation to have to draw a card, and on their turn they have to draw a card at the beginning of their turn. They don't have any cards to draw, they lose. And if the runner has to discard a card and they don't have any cards to discard, they lose. So their cards in some ways almost represent the runner's health. Alright, so I decided to make a pros and cons list, and as this is a game that I like and I want more people to play, I put one more pro on there than con. But let's run through them really quickly, because I'm still trying to be as objective as possible. One interesting thing about this game is that you get to play as a character, and that character also can potentially dictate your style, or actually even better, you can choose a character that dictates your style. There are 3 different factions of runners and 4 different corporations, but as the game is expanded, you have different identity cards that have different special abilities. You can find one that lets you play the way you want to play, or maybe you really find an ability and then you want to build a deck around that, which is something I like. The influence system is really, really interesting. So there are generic cards, and in general any deck can play. There are cards of your faction you can play, and then each card that isn't, well, not each card, but a lot of cards. For example, corporations can't use other corporations' agendas. They can use theirs and neutral ones. But a lot of the cards have this thing here where each card is either worth, 0 to 5 influence. And each of the heroes is going to be allowed to have a certain number of influence. So right now, Kate has to have a minimum deck size of 45 and can have up to 15 influence in other factions. So here's what's neat about it. No card is out of play. You can play any card you want to, for the most part, like I said, not agendas and stuff, but from other factions. However, really powerful ones that are abilities really outside of your faction are going to take up a lot of that influence. And then there are even cool characters that have a lot to do with influence. They only have one, well, there's a character that only has one influence, but the first copy of every card that they put in doesn't cost any influence. So they can have a ton of one-ofs. It's a really interesting way of doing things. And I really like it a lot better than the, say, the mana system in Magic, because everything is based on credits. So you don't have to worry about different types of resources. Just, how do you want to spend an influence in a couple really powerful cards, a lot of different cards. It makes for a really interesting deck building design. Also, because this is a living card game, the simple cost of getting into the game and the value of that cost. So one of the reasons I got out of playing Magic, because I was playing it a lot, it's just so expensive. Wow, I got this Archangel of Thune, I really love the playset. How much is it going to cost me? Or this Elspeth, or whatever. With this game, you can get pretty much all the cards. You buy a data pack, there's 3 of everything in it, the core set has a lot of options, and if you want to get every card in the game, sure, it's going to cost you quite a bit, but then those cards don't go out of standard. And you can get, literally, a playset of almost every card in the game. There's a few exceptions in the core set, but we'll get to that, and that's fantastic. The price of, getting a playset of a couple really high-value cards in Magic, you can get every card in the game, and then they're still there. So it's hard to argue against that sort of value. One other thing I really like is big moments in this game. I've played this game a total of 3 times now, and in one of the games I played, there's a fantastic thing where it came down to the last turn, and I had just a great upgrade on a server to let me boost a piece of ice to protect my server so that I could score it on the next turn and win. There was a game where I was watching where the runner, was trying to run through this huge piece of ice that was going to do 4 brain damage to them, which is a big thing, and they decided to do it because they could look at 3 cards, and if one of them was certain one, it seems to more consistently provide those sort of moments. And lastly is, you can always do something. A lot of times in Magic, maybe, you played, and you might say, well, this is your fault. If you play too many cards, you don't have draw card mechanic, draw cards or whatever. In this game, you can always draw a card. You can always get a credit. It's sometimes inefficient to do that, but you can always do it because the deck size is a little bit smaller also, and there's a lot of tutor cards, if you will, that allow you to go look for a specific card. So, and because you have either 3 or 4 actions, and if you're at a quirk, you have an automatic draw also, it's, even if there are times where you have to really slow down, and this is definitely a game about tempo, if there's enough time, you can still catch up, because, you're never really left with feeling like there's nothing I can do, because there's only one mana source, or resource when it comes to credits, and you can always draw cards or get credits during your turn if you have to. Some potential cons. You might think that there's potentially a small card pool, and that's something that I might be setting this up as kind of a straw man argument against, but as the game has expanded, the card pool has gotten bigger, and again, one of the things I like about it is, the cards aren't going out of standard, so the card pool will only continue to grow. So initially I think that was a problem with Netrunner, but it's less and less of a problem now, and it's not like Hearthstone before the expand, almost everybody's playing the same decks. Like every card game, there's certain stronger decks and the meta changes, but I think that's becoming less and less of an issue. Now, a real issue is potentially the learning curve. One thing this game does is try to bring in the theme by renaming everything. It's not your draw pile. If you're the corp, it's your R&D. If you're the runner, it's your stack. I mean, there's just a lot of terminology, and that can be a legitimate concern getting into the game. Although there's a lot of good videos out there, and especially if you have someone who already plays who can teach you, you can get around that. The game can feel a little bit janky while you're learning it. If you have a starter deck and you're going against somebody who has all these traps and you just die, or if you're playing someone who does what's called fast advance, where they're playing agendas out of hand. So what they're doing basically is they don't have an agenda or an asset sitting there for you to steal yet, and on the same turn they manage to play it and score it. Well, that can seem kind of hard to beat, because how am I ever going to steal it? Now, but the thing is, as you learn the game, and again, I'm just a beginner, this is just my opinions on what I've learned so far, there are play styles where you can try to get around that, where you can be, going after their deck before they draw cards. And if they're playing that fast advance, they probably have a lot of cards. It's one of the things I didn't get into, is the corporation has to have a certain number of points of agendas in their deck based on the number of cards in their deck. And if they have a lot of easy to score, low-cost agendas, and they have to have more agendas. So you're more likely going to be able to get them out of their R&D or their draw pile, or if you force them to discard cards out of their archives, especially if you're playing one of the guys who's known as Noise. There is one potential issue with getting all the cards in the game. The core set comes with 3 copies of a lot of cards, 2 copies of some cards, and 1 copy of some other cards. The 1-ofs are kind of the issue. You can go get 1 copy of all the 2-of cards, relatively cheap, probably like $10 or so on Amazon or eBay or something, because a lot of people buy more than 1 core set, and then they have 4 of the cards. You can only have 3 of a card in your deck, so those are easy to find. Those 1-ofs, though, those can be a little tricky, so, potentially there is a reason to buy 2 core sets, because trying to track those cards down could cost you as much as a core set. So some things that are neither here nor there, that you have to decide on something that you think is important or not. The theme, the cyberpunk future, I'm really neither here nor there on it. That might be something that's really attractive to you or not, but it's something different, than, wizards and creatures and all of that. And along those lines, it's not a creature versus creature punch the other guy in the face. It's very different than that. So if you're used to games where you're just bringing your opponent's life total down to 0, it does play quite a bit differently than that, and that can be huge positive or potentially negative if that's the sort of game you want to play. The bluffing element is probably the big thing that is going to make or break your interest in the game, because as a corporation, you have these plays where, okay, I'm going to put this card down and advance it on my turn, and maybe advance it twice, depending on the faction I'm playing. You might go after it, and you might be able to get to it, and it might do a bunch of damage to you, and you have to discard cards. But if you don't go after it, then, maybe I'm going to score it next turn and get a bunch of points. So that's a big element of the game. You can do things where, oh, I'm going to get rid of this card that was there that you hadn't seen yet and get this other one in. Usually if I do that, that means I'm getting rid of a trap you didn't go after and putting in an agenda. But maybe I'm actually putting in a trap from another trap, or actually being willing to get rid of an agenda to try to trick you, things like that. So that could be something you really like, or not like. And as a runner, you're constantly trying to read the other player. And that element is something a lot of players are going to love, but some players really may not be interested in that. They might find that stressful, or just an element that they don't actually enjoy. And that's something you kind of have to decide if your personality is going to be suited to it. I will say, that was one of the reasons I didn't get into Netrunner initially, because I didn't think that it's something I would enjoy. But this seems to be one of those games that's really difficult at first, but as you learn more about it, what the different factions do, what the odds of different things are, it ended up being something that I was surprised at how interested I was in it. So, should you play Netrunner? I can't tell you should, I don't know you. The goal of this video was to try to give you some more information, instead of just talking about, how you play the game, what really is going on, what might appeal to some people, what might not appeal to people, and hopefully I've done that. If there's any interest in this, I think I might continue this series and talk about some of the data packs as they come out. And there are also big expansions. The data packs add a few cards for each faction, a few neutral cards, and 3 of each of them, and the big expansions give a bunch of cards to one faction on each side. Only 2 of those are out, another one's coming soon. And give my perspective as a new player, so that other people who are new players are thinking about it, even though the game's been out for a while, maybe this is a place where they can turn for, not necessarily insight, but opinions and just information on how the game's going, and maybe this is a game that I'll do a few video series about, if there's any interest in that. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this, hopefully you got some information that might be useful, and we'll talk to you guys again soon. Alright, bye!